So just to get the kickoff, I have a question that pertains to everybody, maybe not to Nick, but the idea of dazzle camouflage, by the way, really does get to me and makes me think, you know, hidden in plain sight, and it's there and it's not there, or it's there but in a different way than you thought it was there. That seems to me to have larger implications. I have to think about that. But maybe for this event and the kinds of topics that people have been taking up. For me, there's been kind of all day a kind of elephant in the room, at least in my room, and that is there's a kind of benign surveillance that's going on and that is being proposed in many of the presentations. And so there is a taking from people. It's been indicated that people in surveys will express an okay about that. But as we know, these things accumulate, and in ways that members of the public are not always appreciating as they give up their privacy, for example, or even their rights, bit by bit and piece by piece. So my question is, in regard to the kind of projects that you've been involved in, that you're thinking about, the kind of technologies that you have or you're on the cusp of having or are wishing to have, to what is there something in the design? Could there be something in the design? Is this on the table to have it in the design? To suspiciousness, that is to be ways of being wary about how this gathering up could be not benign, and how do we do that? I think everybody would agree that gathering intelligence is a good idea, but then stumble on these other possibilities. And this has commercial implications because, in a way, one of our presentations today talked about noise, airport noise, and the way in which that enters in as a hard fact that influences the industries involved and causes Heathrow unending delays. And so, in effect, what is the social noise, the moral noise that is being generated by these projects, and how can either the projects themselves or some successive project deal with that? And I'm going to just open it up. That's my only question. And after we have a run through, then everybody else can get in and react.
I'll start. I'm not sure if this will get there, but I'll start it. Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think there's sort of a looming moral conflict over the use of data. So we agree with that. I actually, just to kick things off, in their current iteration, I actually believe airlines cannot be great brands precisely because of one reason, which is that they pit passengers against each other. And at the heart of all great brands is a sense of community. Even a walled garden brand like Apple still gives out Apple stickers when you buy a computer, so you can put it on something to say, hey, I am part of this tribe. So in my estimation, the more positive version of the sort of emerging surveillance state is actually something that enables community, something that lets people know, hey, I know you, you know me, even if we just know each other sort of in a transient state, that what's missing from the airport and the air travel experience is some sort of sense of community. And right now, while we actually would ostensibly believe that airports are about connection, they're largely about alienation. They're largely about a sense of, I am in between places I would like to be. So the opportunity for data, in my opinion, is to create community.
I mean, I think that for me, the primary design project in relation to kind of your statement is the reality that there are no machines without biases, and it's why I chose to do a particularly grotesque variation of my. I mean, the neural network that did or the adversarial network that did the face switching thing is basically the same model with some of the intelligence stripped out as the city one. But I picked, I wanted to do something like that was grotesque, maybe a bit disarming to expose that fact. And that there are biases in terms of the machines themselves, the agendas behind who's making those machines. Like often I think like within the cityscape one, for example, when I exhibited that, the fact that it was so kind of smooth and seamless, and when I pinned it up on the wall, people thought it was a satellite photo of a city. It was actually exhibited on that wall right over there. In some ways, I think undermines or becomes complicit in the project without actually raising an awareness of those biases. So kind of along those lines, there's a better version of the gender bending AI that actually makes you attractive. This is the same model, the same data set, but I didn't train it as long. So I proposed it as like, this will make you into either a male model or a female model. And my friend said, isn't this like ethically disturbing territory? And I was like, why? He's like, well, you're making decisions on what an attractive person is. And I was like, yes. And he goes, well, who let you do that? And I was like, me, because I designed the machine. And that's, I think, the most critical thing to keep in mind with these kind of systems is that there is no such thing as a kind of objective, omnipotent, like a benign, abstract machine that just works for the betterment of our society. It all has some kind of underlying motivation, typically capitalistic.
Samantha, do you want to get in on this?
Well, as far as having a society that's able to let technologies understand their personal data and understanding, I recently read a book called Everybody Lies, and it's about survey data where people being surveyed will always lie on a survey, but they don't lie on their Google searches. Many of you may be familiar with this book. And the idea is that when you analyze the data from Google, that you can understand a person's inner thoughts, basically just seeing in succession what they tend to Google, and which kind of makes me worried for my job when I Google stuff to put in images. But the point that I'm saying is that people are already giving up this sort of information, and they just don't know that it's already being harnessed. And when they're unaware and they're naive about it being harnessed, they're not being harmed. And I think that with the airport, you can kind of harness different types of data by spinning the idea, especially for different security processes. There are ways to use piezoelectric floors that create lights in the floors that could be your security system, but for kids it's just a playground. It's just kind of understanding how do you market that to the public, and without their knowledge or with their knowledge, you're giving them a more secure access to the air side, and without their knowledge, they think it's something cool that they're walking over. So, in my opinion, and maybe I'm just purely optimistic and a little bit naive, but in my mind, reaching out to the public and letting them know about these different security systems isn't going to hurt them, and I don't think that they're going to feel alienated from the airport in general. I have parents that are very unwilling to do change, and so whenever I suggest any of these ideas to them, they say, no, we won't do that. We like to go through the lines. We like to see our bags checked. We like to make sure no one else's bag gets. And so you're always going to have that perception that you're going to have to overcome, but it's always just changing the perception of the society, and that comes with public education, and that's something that a lot of these projects can help do. Even the art projects, the ones that you were showing with the idea of the airplane taking off, and that's public education. And I think that there's fun ways that you can educate the public and still keep them safe and secure. If that went along with them.
Nick, do you want to?
Oh, well, I could throw a hand grenade now onto your elephant, maybe. I have another thought. It's like, okay, yes, we're all talking about, what happens to our data and our personal profiles and this and that. But in a country where you can still buy rapid-fire rifles, don't we have other problems? Don't we have other problems to think about? I mean, it is an important problem, but there are other problems that we're not talking about. Or it was the irony of Ben and I, we walked from the hotel over here through Skid Row this afternoon, and here we are talking about this super rarefied, seem full or seem less experience, and out there is a total bankruptcy of the social contract of whatsoever. You're living in a third world country, we're not fully aware of it. I don't know, I mean, it's an important question, that elephant, but I think there's many other elephants around that one.
Okay, we've got a herd of elephants. Yes, and I'll then just please speak, but then I think I'll ask to just get a whole, maybe gather up some questions and comments.
Sure. This is a question for Devin. Thank you so much for your presentation. I was taking so many notes, I could barely keep up. I have a question about one thing that you said, which is a lot of the research that I do is by interviewing passengers or observing passengers while they're traveling. And one of the things that I've started to notice in the last, let's say, year or two is when I'm on a plane and I'm looking at what toddlers are doing or grade school kids or teenagers, none of them are going anywhere near the IFE. They've got their own personal device. The moment they get out of the plane, that's what they start using. And it's almost like they don't, like they see it as decoration. And so when you're talking about integrating these things of like, yeah, like it would be awesome to order, room service to your hotel or figure out a way to get a lift line or something like that, but why is that happening? Basically, why is the IFE mediating that? And wouldn't it be much more likely and productive to have the personal device be doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, of course, the big debate as to whether IFE even has a future, right? And they are extraordinarily expensive systems. The rule of thumb from a design standpoint is that they cost around $1,000 per square inch, which is an extraordinary expense. So you're absolutely right. It could totally happen via other devices. The only thing I'd say in defense of IFE systems is that one thing that, it isn't a huge one, but that airlines sometimes sort of seem interested in sort of stripping away everything. And IFE systems are one way to actually do more. So, correct, it could be done through other screens, but it doesn't mean that airlines should arrive at a point where there is almost nothing left to distinguish them from each other. And a digital physical touch point like that could be one way, but I agree.
It's like United's already done it.
Right. Well, United will.
Because guess what? They're bad at developing software apps. So their on-phone app doesn't work on my, which I have the most popular operating system on the planet.
Yep.
It's Android.
It's out there.
It doesn't work on it.
But they added free punches to the face. So, yeah.
I'm glad we got to that. Yes, and we have some other folks too. Sir.
So in our discussion about the ubiquity of surveillance and big data and the ability to create these highly personalized experiences in the airport that are customer focused down to your deep Google search history, and when you couple that with changes in material science that are allowing the printing of ultra thin, flexible, we'll say relatively inexpensive digital projection technology and the ability to use AI to sort of drive all that, it begs the question, does the architecture of the airport, we'll use sort of architecture in the most traditional sense, does it become increasingly irrelevant as the building at a certain point, outside of the highly technical specific needs to service aircraft, does it become just a projection screen with a roof where the architectural experiences is completely individualized and no longer really tied to anything physical or very little physical infrastructure?
That's a great question, but sir, do you want to ask a question?
The technology allows a lot of personalization, right? But as airports are being designed, even today, everything is being designed to the lowest common denominator, right? It's your parents, right, who want to wait in line and don't change that, or the business traveler who doesn't want to touch anything or see anything or get there as quickly as possible, right? So how do we influence the design of terminals in the future to allow that flexibility, whether it's the white box or the, can you guys talk about that as well?
I think that's a kind of pretty big undercurrent to everything that I work on. Like I think there's this potential in these systems. I'm interested in the way they relate to the architectural environment, but then the question comes, are they marginalizing the physical environment? And I honestly think that in some ways, some aspects of the environment that we control as designers, through material effects is going to be transitioned off into other territory. But I think one of the things about getting into how these things are operating and the machines are operating is that even these kind of super next level, whatever magic leap's going to come out when it's finally released, AR platform is that they all have the kind of ongoing struggle with everything that I work on, especially with the real physical stuff, like the autonomous robotics stuff, is vision. And creating environments, I think, I'm actually, everything I do is moving away from dazzle topology. Like it's moving away from trying to camouflage from the sensors because of the brutal difficulty of getting a precise and intelligent scan or perception of the thing that those AR things or those AIs are operating on is already a difficult problem. So I actually think that we'll start to see, we're seeing this in trends in terms of like housing development too, maybe actually a decrease of the open floor plate. We're seeing a lot more kind of segregation of rooms, a lot more surfaces to act as backdrops to perceptual equipment, a lot more corners to help things align themselves to a space. I actually think there is quite a bit of a physical and formal implication to these systems. I mean, like I think the Dubai tunnel is excellent because the physical space is necessary in order to modify the behavior walking through that tunnel so that they do look where they need to look. Like yes, there's the fish, but also you're in a very constrained motion path so that you can very precisely constrain where that person is in front of the sensor mechanisms of the percepts. So I think there's always going to be a physical component to relationship to this digital stuff.
And also, I don't want that your question to get lost. So you just remind us?
Yeah, I think you're answering that, and I think it's an interesting dialogue between having to create enough physical structure to support all the technology and the notion when it comes, I think, to flexibility, particularly as it comes to some of the aviation process infrastructure like security and check-in and baggage and all the stuff that we have to deal with. It almost wants to be supported in this idea of museum universal space where everything can happen everywhere and nothing is anywhere, and balancing that with the ability to have things like columns and roofs and air ducts and things like that.
I actually have a less technical answer for your question as well, and maybe I personally believe that if you're going to dumb things down to the most common denominator, what you need to do is, again, go back to this idea of public education. Those people that we do have to kind of lower the system's intelligence to, they don't travel as much as everybody else. So every time they're coming to the airport, they have to learn a new process. So if we can increase the scale at which we're deploying these processes against the airport, they're going to have to get used to learning a new process every time that they come, and that's just something that's integrated into the airport. I know recently I was again reading, because I'm a little nerdy, and I was reading about Super Mario Brothers and how it was the most innovative game out there for the longest time, after Tetris, of course. And the idea was because it was educating people as they were playing, and they didn't have to sit and listen to a tutorial. They were playing and being educated at the same time. So it's the same idea for airports or any business, any architecture that is involving technology as a new dynamic in their motto or their ability to interact with people, is the idea that you bring people in and you don't force them to be educated, but you educate them in a level that they feel like they're interacting and engaging with the space and engaging with the people in the space. And I think that that's probably easier said than done, but we just need to start thinking of ways that we can kind of engage the community and teach them about these processes so that they're no longer scared of them, so that they can rely on them and they can see them as something that's beneficial to their traveling habits instead of something that's detrimental to their traveling habits.
And the only thing I'll add real quick, and I'll keep it in headline form, is that to your point about lowest common denominator, the best airports, in my opinion, are the result of dictatorial structures and dictatorial processes. And short of benevolent dictators, the future of airports is actually member-driven. That in the future, airports should be about what airport do I belong to, and quite literally, like what airport am I a member of, right? And that's one way to actually achieve what you're bringing up, which is a level of sort of stakeholderness, right? That actually will allow you to rise above sort of that lowest common denominator.
We're out of time, so thanks everyone, and we should applaud our panel.